The morning mist clung to the edges of Fort Bragg like a shroud, and in the distance, the crack of rifle fire echoed across the training grounds with mechanical precision. But there was something different about this particular morning, something that would ripple through the ranks like a stone thrown into still water. Staff Sergeant Marcus, Bulldog, Rodriguez had seen thousands of recruits come and go, their faces blending into a sea of olive drab and nervous sweat. He'd watched tough guys crumble under pressure, and quiet ones surprise everyone with their steel. But when he first laid eyes on Private First Class Kestrel Thorne, his weathered face broke into the kind of smirk that spoke of years spent watching people fail. She stood barely 5'4" in her combat boots, her auburn hair pulled back in a regulation bun that somehow managed to look both professional and defiant. Her BDUs hung loose on her slight frame, and when she shouldered her M4 carbine, it seemed to dwarf her entirely. The other soldiers in her unit, all men, all considerably larger, exchanged glances that mixed amusement with something darker. They'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The girl who'd supposedly been some hotshot pilot before washing out of flight school. The one who'd requested infantry training after her medical discharge. The one who insisted she belonged here, carrying a rifle instead of flying jets. Rodriguez had laughed then, a bark of derision that echoed across the range. "Well, well," he'd said, his voice carrying the authority of 2 decades in the army. "Looks like we got ourselves a bird who forgot how to fly." The other soldiers snickered, but Kess said nothing. She simply adjusted her grip on the weapon and stared downrange at the target 300 meters away. Her silence only seemed to amuse Rodriguez more. What none of them knew, what they couldn't have known, was that Kestrel Thorne had once been Captain Kestrel Thorne, call sign Raptor, one of the most promising F-16 pilots in the Air Force. They didn't know about the classified mission over eastern Syria or the surface-to-air missile that had nearly ended her career and her life. They didn't know about the months of physical therapy, the nightmares that still woke her in a cold sweat, or the medical board that had deemed her unfit for flight duty due to traumatic brain injury and associated vertigo. They saw only what stood before them, a small woman in an oversized uniform, trying to prove something to a world that had already written her off. The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the mist and revealing the stark geometry of the rifle range. Target silhouettes stood like sentinels at various distances, their black forms crisp against the pale backdrop of the impact berm. Rodriguez walked the firing line with the casual confidence of a man who'd seen it all, his voice carrying across the range as he barked instructions to the assembled soldiers. "Today we separate the shooters from the prayers," he announced, his words punctuated by the metallic click of magazines being loaded. "Iron sights only, no optics, no excuses. 300 meters, 10 rounds, and we'll see who's been paying attention in marksmanship class." The other soldiers took their positions with varying degrees of confidence. There was Private Collins, a former college football player whose massive frame made his rifle look like a toy. Specialist Martinez, who'd grown up hunting in the mountains of Colorado and spoke about firearms with the reverence of a true believer. Corporal Washington, whose steady hands and calm demeanor suggested natural talent. And then there was Kess, taking her position at the far end of the firing line, her movements economical and precise. Rodriguez watched her settle into her shooting stance and his smirk widened. "Thorne," he called out, his voice carrying a note of theatrical concern. "You sure you can handle that weapon? It's got a bit more kick than whatever they let you play with in the chair force." The intended insult hung in the air like smoke, and several soldiers chuckled. Kess didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge that she'd heard him. She simply checked her weapon's safety, adjusted her position slightly, and waited. The wind picked up, carrying with it the scent of cordite and the distant sound of helicopters conducting training flights. For a moment, Kess felt her chest tighten as the familiar thrum of rotors triggered memories she'd rather forget. The cockpit of her F-16, the HUD display showing enemy contacts, the sudden bloom of fire and smoke as the missile found its mark. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and forced the images away. That was another life, another person. The pilot was gone, grounded forever by injury and bureaucracy, but the warrior remained. Rodriguez raised his voice, calling the firing line to attention. "Shooters, you have 10 rounds, iron sights 300 meters. You may commence firing when ready." The range fell silent except for the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant hum of base activities. One by one, the soldiers began their strings of fire, each shot echoing across the range with sharp authority. Collins fired first, his shots coming in rapid succession, the heavy recoil of his rifle visible in the way his body absorbed each impact. Martinez followed, his timing more deliberate, each shot preceded by a moment of careful aim. Kess remained motionless, her rifle still unfired, her breathing steady and controlled. Rodriguez noticed her hesitation and felt his amusement grow. "Problem Thorn," he called out, his voice carrying across the range. "Gun too heavy for you." Still she didn't respond, didn't move, didn't acknowledge his presence. She simply continued to stare downrange, her eyes focused on the distant target with an intensity that bordered on meditation. The other soldiers finished their strings of fire, their weapons now silent, magazines empty. The range fell quiet again, save for the soft rustle of wind through the grass and the distant sound of a jet passing overhead. Kess felt her pulse quicken at the sound, but she pushed the sensation away and finally raised her rifle to her shoulder. Her movements were fluid, practiced, the result of countless hours of training that had become muscle memory. She settled into her firing position with the grace of a dancer, her body forming perfect alignment with her weapon and target. Rodriguez watched with growing curiosity as Kess began to fire. Her shots came slowly, deliberately, each one preceded by a long moment of careful aim. There was something almost ritualistic about her process, as if she were performing a ceremony rather than simply shooting at a target. The crack of her rifle seemed sharper than the others, more precise, each shot followed by a moment of absolute stillness before she cycled the bolt and prepared for the next round. When her magazine finally clicked empty, Kess lowered her weapon and stepped back from the firing line. The range fell silent again, the only sound the whisper of wind through the grass and the distant hum of base activities. Rodriguez keyed his radio, calling for the targets to be scored and retrieved. As they waited, he studied Kess with new interest, nodding the way she stood with quiet confidence, her weapon held with casual familiarity. The target crew worked quickly, retrieving the paper silhouettes and driving them back to the firing line for scoring. Rodriguez examined each target with the practiced eye of a veteran instructor, making notes on his clipboard as he assessed each soldier's performance. Collins had managed a respectable group, though several of his shots had strayed wide. Martinez had done better, his mountain hunting experience evident in his steady shooting. Washington had surprised everyone with a tight cluster of shots, earning approving nods from the other soldiers. And then Rodriguez came to Kess's target, and his clipboard slipped from suddenly nerveless fingers. The paper silhouette bore 10 holes, each one precisely placed in the center of the target's chest. But it wasn't just the accuracy that stunned him. It was the way the holes had been placed. Rather than scattered randomly across the target's vital zone, they formed a perfect cluster no larger than a silver dollar, each subsequent shot having passed through nearly the same hole as the one before. Rodriguez picked up his clipboard with hands that trembled slightly, his eyes moving from the target to Kess and back again. The other soldiers crowded around, their earlier amusement replaced by stunned silence as they stared at the impossible precision of her shooting. The target looked as if it had been struck by a single, impossibly large bullet rather than 10 separate rounds. "Well," Rodriguez said finally, his voice hoarse with shock, "I guess we know who's been paying attention in marksmanship class." He held up the target for all to see, and the assembled soldiers fell silent, their earlier mockery replaced by something approaching awe. Kess said nothing, simply slung her rifle and waited for further instructions, her face betraying no emotion at all. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. He'd been teaching marksmanship for 15 years and he'd never seen shooting like this. Not from seasoned snipers, not from special forces operators, not from anyone. The cluster of holes in the target's center wasn't just good shooting, it was the kind of precision that bordered on the supernatural. He found himself studying Kess with new eyes, noting details he'd missed before. The way she held herself with quiet confidence, the economy of her movements, the calluses on her hands that spoke of countless hours of practice. As the soldiers prepared to move to the next phase of training, Rodriguez pulled Kess aside. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" he asked, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. For the first time that morning, Kess looked directly at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made him step back involuntarily. It wasn't anger or defiance, but something far more dangerous, the calm, measured gaze of someone who had looked death in the face and lived to tell about it. "I had a good teacher," she said simply, her voice carrying the faint trace of a southern accent. "My grandfather, he was a Marine sniper in Vietnam. He taught me that shooting isn't about the gun, it's about the mind. Control your breathing, control your heartbeat, control your thoughts, and the bullet will go where you want it to go." She paused, her eyes distant for a moment. "He also taught me that respect isn't given, it's earned, one shot at a time." Rodriguez nodded slowly, his earlier assumptions crumbling like a house of cards. He'd been wrong about her, completely and utterly wrong. This wasn't some washed-up pilot trying to prove a point. This was a warrior, someone who belonged on the battlefield regardless of her size or gender. He made a mental note to pull her file, to learn more about her background and the circumstances that had brought her to his training company. As the morning progressed and the soldiers moved through various training exercises, Rodriguez found himself watching Kess with growing respect. She moved through the obstacles with fluid grace, her small size proving to be an advantage in tight spaces. During hand-to-hand combat training, she used technique and leverage to defeat opponents twice her size. In tactical exercises, she demonstrated an understanding of battlefield dynamics that impressed even the most experienced soldiers. But it was during the afternoon's advanced marksmanship training that Kess truly shone. Rodriguez had set up a series of challenging scenarios, moving targets, obscured positions, time pressure. One by one, the soldiers attempted the course, most of them struggling with the complexity of the challenges. Collins knocked down about half the targets, his power unable to compensate for the precision required. Martinez did better, his hunting experience serving him well, but he missed several of the more difficult shots. When Kess's turn came, Rodriguez watched with intense curiosity. She approached the starting line with the same quiet confidence she'd shown all day, her rifle held with casual familiarity. At the signal, she moved through the course like a ghost, her movements fluid and economical. Each shot seemed to come almost casually, without the lengthy aiming process that had characterized her earlier performance. Target after target fell, each one struck with surgical precision. When she finished, Rodriguez checked the course and found that she'd achieved a perfect score, something that hadn't happened in his 15 years of teaching. Moreover, she'd done it in record time, moving through the obstacles with a speed that suggested instinctive understanding of tactical movement. The other soldiers watched in stunned silence as Rodriguez announced her score, their earlier mockery now seeming childish and petty. That evening, Rodriguez sat in his office, Kess's personnel file spread across his desk. What he read there made him whistle softly under his breath. Captain Kestrel Thorne, call sign Raptor, had been one of the Air Force's most promising young pilots. Her record was stellar, top of her class at the Air Force Academy, exceptional performance in flight training, multiple commendations for courage and skill. She'd been fast-tracked for advanced fighter training, destined for greatness in the cockpit of an F-16 Fighting Falcon. But then had come the classified mission over Syria, the one that had ended her flying career and nearly ended her life. The file was heavily redacted, but Rodriguez could read between the lines: surface-to-air missile, ejection under fire, traumatic brain injury, months of rehabilitation, medical board review, flight status revoked. The dreams of a young pilot shattered by the harsh realities of combat. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair, staring at the file with new understanding. No wonder she'd been so quiet, so focused. She wasn't just some recruit trying to prove herself. She was a warrior trying to find a new way to serve, to channel the skills and courage that had made her a great pilot into a new arena. The Army had given her a chance to continue fighting, even if it meant trading the cockpit for the rifle range. He made a decision then, one that would change both their lives. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years, waiting as it rang in some distant office. When the voice answered, Rodriguez spoke quickly and quietly, his words carrying the weight of conviction. "Tom, it's Marcus Rodriguez at Bragg. I need to talk to you about a transfer. I've got someone here who needs to be in your unit, someone special." The conversation that followed was brief but intense. Rodriguez found himself advocating for Kes with a passion that surprised even him, describing her skills and potential with the fervor of a true believer. When he finally hung up the phone, he felt a sense of satisfaction that he hadn't experienced in years. He just recommended Kes for selection to the Army's elite sniper school, one of the most demanding and prestigious programs in the military. The next morning, Rodriguez found Kes on the range before dawn, running through shooting drills with methodical precision. He watched her for several minutes, noting the way she moved with quiet confidence, the economy of her motions, the absolute focus she brought to every shot. When she noticed him watching, she lowered her rifle and waited, her expression calm and patient. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Rodriguez began, his voice carrying none of its earlier mockery. "About respect being earned one shot at a time. I think maybe I owe you some respect and an apology." He paused, studying her face for any reaction. "I judged you before I knew you, and that was wrong. You're not here to prove anything to me or anyone else. You're here because you're a soldier and you belong here." Kes nodded slightly, accepting his words without comment. Rodriguez continued, his voice growing more serious. "I've recommended you for advanced training. Sniper school, it's tough, probably the toughest thing you'll ever do, but I think you've got what it takes. Hell, I know you do. The question is whether you want it." He handed her a folder thick with paperwork and official forms. "Think about it. You don't have to decide right now, but the opportunity is there if you want it." Kes took the folder, her fingers tracing the official seals and letterheads. For a moment her composure wavered, and Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the vulnerability beneath her warrior exterior. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why would you do this for me?" Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because I've been teaching soldiers for 15 years, and I've learned to recognize the real thing when I see it. You're not just good, you're exceptional. And the Army needs exceptional soldiers." That afternoon, as the training company prepared for their final exercise, Rodriguez gathered the soldiers for a briefing. The exercise would be a culmination of everything they'd learned: marksmanship, tactics, teamwork, and leadership. They would be divided into teams and given a series of objectives to complete, with their performance being evaluated by a panel of senior instructors. Rodriguez announced the team assignments, and there was a moment of tension when he named Kes as one of the team leaders. Several soldiers exchanged glances, their expressions mixing surprise with skepticism. Leading a team was a significant responsibility, one that traditionally went to the most experienced and proven soldiers. But Rodriguez had seen enough to convince him that Kes had the skills and temperament to lead effectively. The exercise began at dawn, with each team moving out to their assigned sectors. Kes led her team with quiet confidence, her movements economical and precise. She communicated through hand signals and whispered commands, her tactical awareness evident in every decision. When they encountered their first objective, a series of targets positioned at various ranges and angles, she positioned her team with the skill of a seasoned combat veteran. The targets fell quickly and efficiently, each soldier in her team playing their assigned role with clockwork precision. Rodriguez watched from the observation post, noting the way Kes coordinated the assault, her small size proving to be an advantage as she moved through the terrain with ghost-like stealth. Her shooting was flawless, each shot finding its mark with surgical precision. But it was during the final phase of the exercise that Kess truly distinguished herself. Her team had been assigned to eliminate a series of targets positioned at extreme range, beyond the effective range of most infantry weapons. The other teams had struggled with this challenge, their shots falling short or wide of the mark. But Kess studied the terrain with the eye of a trained marksman, calculating wind, distance, and elevation with mathematical precision. Her first shot rang out across the valley, and a target 800 meters away fell immediately. The observers exchanged glances, their expressions mixing surprise with admiration. 800 meters was at the very limit of effective range for the weapons they were using, requiring not just exceptional marksmanship, but also an understanding of ballistics that bordered on the scientific. Rodriguez keyed his radio, calling for confirmation of the hit. The response came back quickly, not just a hit, but a perfect center mass shot that would have been instantly fatal in combat. Kess continued methodically, engaging targets at ranges that pushed the limits of both weapon and shooter. Each shot was perfect. Each target fell exactly as planned. When the exercise concluded, Rodriguez found himself looking at Kess with new eyes. She wasn't just a good soldier. She was potentially one of the finest marksmen he'd ever encountered. Her combination of technical skill, tactical awareness, and calm under pressure made her a natural for advanced sniper training. More than that, she had the kind of quiet leadership that inspired confidence in others. That evening, the training company gathered for their graduation ceremony. Rodriguez stood before the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years of experience as he addressed them. "Today you've proven yourselves as soldiers," he began, his eyes moving across the faces of the men and women who had started as raw recruits and were now finished infantry soldiers. "You've learned to shoot, to move, to communicate, and to fight as a team. But more than that, you've learned what it means to be part of something bigger than yourselves." He paused, his gaze finding Kess in the crowd. "Some of you came here with something to prove. Others came here running from something. But all of you are leaving here as soldiers, ready to serve your country and your fellow warriors with honor and distinction." He held up a small wooden plaque, its surface bearing the insignia of the sniper school. "This represents an opportunity for advanced training, for those who have demonstrated exceptional ability and dedication. It's not given lightly, and it's not for everyone. But for those who accept it, it represents a chance to serve at the highest levels of military excellence." Rodriguez called Kess forward, and she moved with the same quiet confidence she'd shown throughout her training. The assembled soldiers watched in respectful silence as he presented her with the plaque, their earlier mockery now seeming like a distant memory. "Private First Class Thorne," he said formally, "you have demonstrated exceptional skill and dedication during your training. It is my privilege to recommend you for advanced sniper training, with the full confidence that you will bring honor to this unit and to the Army." Kess accepted the plaque with hands that trembled slightly, her composure finally cracking to reveal the emotion beneath. For a moment, she was no longer the stoic warrior, but simply a young woman who had found her way back to service after losing everything she'd thought she wanted. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of genuine gratitude. "I won't let you down." As the ceremony concluded and the soldiers dispersed to their various assignments, Rodriguez found himself alone with Kess on the darkened range. The targets stood like silent sentinels in the distance, witnesses to the transformation that had taken place over the past weeks. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first saw you, I thought you were just another recruit who'd wash out before the end of the first week. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things." Kess nodded, her eyes distant as she stared out at the familiar landscape of the training range. "I was wrong about some things too," she admitted. "I thought my career was over when they grounded me. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered, but maybe I just needed to find a different way to serve." She paused, her fingers tracing the insignia on the plaque. "My grandfather always said that a warrior finds a way to fight no matter what. Maybe he was right." Rodriguez studied her profile in the dim light, noting the quiet strength in her bearing. "What's your call sign going to be?" he asked. "When you get to sniper school, they'll want to know." Kess was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the distant targets. "Ghost," she said finally. "I think I'd like to be called Ghost." Rodriguez nodded, understanding instinctively why she'd chosen that name. It spoke to the way she moved through the world. Quietly, efficiently, leaving no trace except the precision of her work. The weeks that followed Kess's graduation passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. She'd accepted the recommendation for sniper school, despite the daunting reputation of the program. The school had a washout rate of over 70%, and those who failed often left the military entirely, their confidence shattered by the brutal demands of the training. But Kess approached the challenge with the same quiet determination she'd shown throughout her infantry training. Rodriguez helped her prepare, sharing the wisdom of his years of experience and connecting her with other soldiers who had successfully completed the program. He arranged for additional range time, allowing her to practice with the precision rifles she'd be using in advanced training. He also worked with her on the mental aspects of sniping, the patience, the focus, the ability to remain motionless for hours while waiting for the perfect shot. As her departure date approached, Rodriguez found himself feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, pride in a student who had exceeded every expectation. Kess had transformed from a seemingly fragile recruit into a formidable warrior, her quiet strength and exceptional skills making her a natural for the challenges ahead. More than that, she'd earned the respect of her fellow soldiers through her actions rather than her words. The night before she left for sniper school, Rodriguez found Kess on the range one final time, running through shooting drills with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. He watched her for several minutes, noting the way she moved with unconscious grace, the economy of her motions, the absolute focus she brought to every shot. When she noticed him watching, she lowered her rifle and waited, her expression calm and patient. "Ready for tomorrow?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Kess nodded, her confidence evident in her bearing. "As ready as I can be," she replied. "I've learned everything I can here. Now it's time to see if I can apply it in a new environment." Rodriguez smiled, remembering the uncertain recruit who had stood on this same range weeks earlier, enduring the mockery of her peers with quiet dignity. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about that first day on the range, about the way I acted, the things I said. I want you to know that I'm not proud of that. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment, and I almost missed recognizing one of the finest soldiers I've ever trained." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "But maybe that's the point. Maybe we all need to be reminded that warriors come in all shapes and sizes, and that the measure of a soldier isn't their appearance but their actions." Kess was quiet for a moment, her eyes distant as she considered his words. "I think I needed to hear that doubt," she said finally. "I needed to prove to myself that I could do this, that I could find a new way to serve. Your skepticism made me work harder, push myself further than I might have otherwise." She smiled slightly, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "So thank you for that, for doubting me and then for believing in me." The next morning, Rodriguez stood on the tarmac as Kess boarded the transport that would take her to sniper school. She moved with the same quiet confidence she'd shown throughout her training, her kit bag slung over her shoulder and her rifle case in hand. As she reached the aircraft's boarding ramp, she turned back and gave him a small nod of acknowledgement, not a salute, but something more personal, more meaningful. Rodriguez watched until the transport disappeared into the morning sky, its engines growing fainter until they were swallowed by the vast expanse of blue. He felt a strange mixture of pride and loss, the satisfaction of a job well done tempered by the knowledge that he might never see Kess again. The military had a way of scattering people across the globe, and snipers in particular were often deployed to remote and dangerous locations. But as he walked back to his office, Rodriguez carried with him the memory of that perfect target, the cluster of holes no larger than a silver dollar that had announced the arrival of an exceptional warrior. He'd learned something important from Kess, that assumptions were dangerous, that respect had to be earned, and that sometimes the most unlikely soldiers became the most extraordinary warriors. Months later, Rodriguez received a brief email from an encrypted military address. It contained no details about location or mission, just a simple message. "Ghost here. Thanks for the lesson and respect. It's serving me well." Attached was a single photograph, a view through a rifle scope, crosshairs centered on a distant target, the image sharp and clear despite the extreme range. Rodriguez studied the photograph for a long time, noting the professional quality of the shot and the impossible distance to the target. Somewhere out there, in some remote corner of the world, Kess was putting her skills to use in service of her country. The shy recruit who had endured mockery with quiet dignity had become a ghost in the truest sense, invisible, lethal, and indispensable. He printed the photograph and pinned it to his bulletin board, where it joined the collection of mementos from other exceptional soldiers he'd trained over the years. But this one was different, special in a way that went beyond mere sentiment. It represented a lesson learned, a prejudice overcome, and a warrior discovered in the most unlikely of packages. As the months turned to years, Rodriguez continued to train new recruits, passing on the lessons he'd learned from his time with Kess. He spoke often of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances, of giving everyone a chance to prove their worth. He told the story of the small recruit who had outshot seasoned soldiers with iron sights and dead calm nerves, though he never mentioned her name or specific details. The story became part of the lore of the training company, passed down from instructor to student like a military legend. It served as a reminder that warriors came in all forms, that size and strength were less important than skill and determination. Most importantly, it taught that respect was something to be earned through actions, not granted based on assumptions. Rodriguez retired from the Army after 25 years of service, his final assignment being the training company where he'd met Kess. At his retirement ceremony, he spoke briefly about the lessons he'd learned from his years of training soldiers. He mentioned the importance of patience, of understanding that every recruit had potential, and of never judging a warrior by their appearance. In the audience, scattered among the current members of the training company, were several soldiers who had served with Kess during her time there. They remembered her quiet strength, her exceptional marksmanship, and the way she'd earned the respect of everyone who served with her. Some had gone on to distinguished careers of their own, carrying with them the lessons they'd learned from watching her transform from doubt to respect. After the ceremony, Rodriguez cleaned out his office, packing away the accumulated mementos of his career. He paused when he came to the photograph Kess had sent, studying it one final time. The image had faded slightly over the years, but its message remained clear. Somewhere out there, a ghost was still serving, still fighting, still proving that warriors came in all forms. He folded the photograph carefully and placed it in his personal effects, a reminder of one of the most important lessons he'd learned during his career. As he walked out of his office for the final time, Rodriguez carried with him the knowledge that he'd played a small part in forging an exceptional warrior, someone who would continue to serve long after his own service had ended. The training range fell silent as the sun set over Fort Bragg, the targets standing like silent sentinels in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow would bring new recruits, new challenges, new opportunities to discover hidden potential. But tonight, the range belonged to memories of a small recruit who had shocked everyone with her skill, of lessons learned about prejudice and respect, and of the transformation that could occur when someone was given the chance to prove their worth. In the distance, the sound of aircraft engines echoed across the base, a reminder that the military never slept, never stopped preparing for the challenges ahead. Somewhere out there in the vast expanse of the world, a ghost moved through the shadows, her skills honed by years of training and hardened by combat experience. The mockery that had once followed her had been replaced by respect, earned one shot at a time, one mission at a time, one life saved at a time. Rodriguez drove home through the familiar streets of Fayetteville, the city that had grown up around the military base. He passed the usual collection of military bars and tattoo shops, the pawn shops and uniform stores that catered to soldiers and their families. The civilian world felt strange after so many years in uniform, but he looked forward to the quiet retirement that awaited him. As he pulled into his driveway, Rodriguez thought about the letter he would write to Kess, if he knew where to send it. He would tell her about his retirement, about the way her story had become part of the training company's lore. He would tell her that she'd taught him as much as he'd taught her, that their brief time together had changed him in ways he was still discovering. But he knew that such letters were impossible in the world of classified operations and operational security. Kess existed now only as Ghost, a call sign in classified reports and encrypted communications. Her real identity was buried beneath layers of security protocols and need-to-know restrictions. She had become what she'd always been meant to be, a warrior who served in the shadows, invisible and indispensable. The next morning, Rodriguez woke to the sound of aircraft engines overhead, a formation of fighters heading out for training exercises. He stood in his backyard, watching the jets streak across the clear sky, their vapor trails etching temporary lines against the blue. For a moment, he wondered if one of those pilots might be facing the same challenges Kess had faced, the same doubts about their place in the military hierarchy. He hoped that somewhere, somehow, the lessons he'd learned from Kess were being passed on to new generations of soldiers. The importance of looking beyond surface appearances, of giving everyone a chance to prove their worth, of understanding that respect was earned through actions rather than granted based on assumptions. These were lessons that went beyond military training, extending into all aspects of life and human interaction. As the jets disappeared over the horizon, Rodriguez felt a sense of continuity, of being part of something larger than himself. The military would continue its mission long after he was gone, training new warriors and sending them out to defend the nation's interests. Some of those warriors would be like Kess, unlikely heroes who would surprise everyone with their capabilities. Years passed, and Rodriguez settled into retirement, though he maintained his connections to the military community. He volunteered at veterans organizations, helped train civilian marksmanship programs, and occasionally spoke at military ceremonies. He never forgot the lessons he'd learned from Kess, and he continued to share them with anyone who would listen. Sometimes, late at night, he would take out the faded photograph and study it under his desk lamp. The image had become a talisman of sorts, a reminder of the importance of keeping an open mind and looking beyond surface appearances. He wondered where Kess was now, what missions she was undertaking, whether she remembered the training range where her transformation had begun. The photograph offered no answers, only questions that would never be resolved, but in some ways that was fitting. Kess had become a ghost in the truest sense, present in spirit but absent in body, influential but invisible. Her legacy lived on in the soldiers she'd inspired, the lessons she'd taught, and the example she'd set for others to follow. Rodriguez died peacefully in his sleep on a warm summer night, 15 years after his retirement from the army. His funeral was attended by hundreds of soldiers, both active duty and retired, who had served with him or been trained by him during his long career. The ceremony was held at the base chapel, with full military honors and a flag-draped coffin. Among the mourners was a small group of soldiers who had served with Kess during her time at the training company. They shared stories of her quiet strength, her exceptional marksmanship, and the way she'd earned everyone's respect through her actions rather than her words. They spoke of the lessons they'd learned from watching her transformation from doubt to respect, and how those lessons had shaped their own careers. After the ceremony, Rodriguez's personal effects were distributed according to his will. Most went to family members, but a few specific items were designated for the training company's museum. Among these was the faded photograph that had hung on his bulletin board for so many years, along with a brief note explaining its significance. The photograph was mounted in a place of honor in the museum, accompanied by a plaque that read, in memory of Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, who taught us that respect is earned one shot at a time. The exhibit became a popular stop for visiting dignitaries and new recruits, serving as a reminder of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Visitors to the museum often asked about the photograph, curious about its significance and the story behind it. The museum guides would explain that it represented one of the most important lessons in military training, that warriors came in all forms, and that the measure of a soldier was their actions, not their appearance. The years continued to pass, and the legend of Ghost grew within certain circles of the military community. Classified reports spoke of impossible shots taken at extreme distances, of high-value targets eliminated with surgical precision, of missions completed without a trace of the operator's presence. Those who worked in intelligence knew that somewhere in the shadows, a sniper was operating at the very pinnacle of the profession. But Ghost remained exactly that, a ghost. No photographs existed in official files, no real name appeared in public records. The operator had become the perfect weapon, invisible and untraceable, known only by results and reputation. In the shadowy world of special operations, this anonymity was both protection and proof of ultimate professionalism. Meanwhile, back at Fort Bragg, the training company continued its mission under new leadership. The story of the small recruit who had outshot seasoned soldiers became part of the unit's oral tradition, passed down from instructor to student like a military parable. New recruits would hear the tale and wonder if they might be capable of similar transformation, if they too might surprise everyone with hidden potential. The rifle range where Kess had first demonstrated her exceptional skills remained largely unchanged, though the targets had been replaced countless times over the years. The geometry of the range was eternal: the firing line, the impact berm, the measured distances that separated marksmen from their goals. But the human drama that played out there was always changing, always evolving. One morning, nearly 20 years after Kess had first taken her position on the firing line, a new group of recruits assembled for marksmanship training. Among them was a young man named David Chen, whose slight build and quiet demeanor reminded the instructors of someone from the unit's past. Like Kess before him, he endured the subtle mockery of his peers with stoic patience, his eyes focused on some distant goal that only he could see. The head instructor, Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, had heard the stories of Rodriguez and the exceptional recruit he'd trained. She approached her job with the lessons he'd learned, understanding that potential often came in unexpected packages. When she saw Chen's performance on the range, not quite as spectacular as the legend, but showing clear signs of exceptional ability, she recognized the signs of hidden greatness. Chen's transformation followed a different path than Kess's had, but it carried the same essential message. Through patience, proper training, and the opportunity to prove himself, he developed into one of the finest marksmen the company had ever produced. His success served as a reminder that the lessons learned from Kess's time at the company were not just historical curiosities, but practical wisdom that could be applied to each new generation of soldiers. As Walsh watched Chen receive his advanced training recommendation, she thought about the chain of influence that connected past to present. Rodriguez had learned from Kess, Walsh had learned from Rodriguez, and now she was passing those lessons on to Chen. The knowledge flowed like a river, carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of decades of military experience. The photograph in the museum continued to fade with time, its edges becoming worn and its image growing dim. But its message remained as clear as ever. That respect was earned through actions, that potential could be found in the most unlikely places, and that a single moment of perfect accuracy could change everything. The image had become more than just a memento. It was a symbol of the transformation that was possible when someone was given the chance to prove their worth. In the classified world of special operations, Ghost continued to serve with distinction. The missions grew more complex, the targets more challenging, but the results remained consistent: precision, professionalism, and complete success. Those who worked with Ghost spoke in hushed tones of the operator's capabilities, their voices carrying the kind of respect reserved for true legends. But Ghost remained human, carrying within the memories of that first day on the range at Fort Bragg. The mockery, the doubt, the moment when everything changed with a single perfect shot. Those memories served as both motivation to continue excelling, and reminder of the importance of proving oneself through actions rather than words. Late at night, in safe houses and forward operating bases around the world, Ghost would sometimes clean the precision rifle that had become an extension of self. The ritual was meditative, a connection to the fundamentals of marksmanship that Rodriguez had helped refine years earlier. Each component of the weapon was inspected, cleaned, and reassembled with the same attention to detail that had characterized that first perfect target. The scope mounted on the rifle bore small scratches and wear marks, evidence of countless missions and extreme conditions. But its optics remained crystal clear, capable of resolving targets at distances that would challenge the most sophisticated equipment. Through this scope, Ghost had seen things that would remain classified for decades, had made shots that would never be officially acknowledged, had served in ways that would never be publicly recognized. The radio crackled to life in the darkness, bringing news of another mission, another target, another opportunity to serve. Ghost acknowledged the transmission with professional brevity, already beginning the mental preparation that each mission required. The location was dangerous, the target was difficult, and the margin for error was non-existent. In other words, it was exactly the kind of mission that Ghost had been trained for. As Ghost prepared for deployment, the thoughts turned briefly to those early days at Fort Bragg, to Rodriguez's skeptical expression, to the sound of laughter from fellow soldiers who had underestimated the small recruit in oversized BDUs. The memory brought not bitterness, but gratitude for the doubt that had forged strength, for the challenge that had revealed potential, for the opportunity to prove that warriors came in all forms. The aircraft engines spun up outside the safe house, their whine cutting through the desert night. Ghost gathered the equipment with practiced efficiency, each piece of gear carefully selected and positioned for optimal access. The mission briefing had been thorough, but the real preparation had begun years earlier on a training range in North Carolina, with an instructor who had learned to look beyond surface appearances. As the aircraft lifted off into the darkness, Ghost settled into the familiar rhythm of operational deployment. The cabin was filled with other operators, each one a specialist in their own field, each one carrying the accumulated wisdom of years of training and experience. But Ghost's path to this moment had been unique, marked by the transformation from doubt to respect, from mockery to legend. The mission unfolded with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, each element falling into place according to the carefully rehearsed plan. Ghost's role was crucial but brief. A single shot at extreme range, taken under conditions that would challenge even the most sophisticated equipment. The target was eliminated with surgical precision, the mission completed without detection, the team extracted safely under cover of darkness. In the after-action report, Ghost's contribution was noted with professional understatement: long-range elimination achieved, target neutralized. The bureaucratic language failed to capture the skill required, the pressure endured, or the perfect execution that had made the mission possible. But in the world of special operations, such understatement was the highest form of praise. Back at Fort Bragg, the training company continued its eternal mission of transforming civilians into soldiers. The range echoed with the sound of rifle fire, the sharp crack of bullets breaking the sound barrier, the metallic clang of targets falling. Each new group of recruits brought fresh challenges and opportunities, fresh chances to discover hidden potential and forge new warriors. Master Sergeant Walsh stood at the observation post, watching the latest group of recruits attempt their first precision shooting exercise. Among them was a young woman whose small stature and quiet demeanor reminded Walsh of the stories she'd heard about Rodriguez's most famous student. The woman's shooting was exceptional, her movements economical and precise, her focus absolute. Walsh made a mental note to watch this recruit carefully, to look for signs of the same exceptional potential that had marked Ghost's early performance. The cycle was beginning again, doubt giving way to respect, mockery transformed into admiration, potential revealed through the crucible of training. The lessons learned from Ghost's time at the company were being applied to a new generation of warriors. The photograph in the museum continued to serve its purpose, reminding visitors of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. School groups would pause before the display, their young faces serious as they absorbed the lesson about prejudice and respect. Military historians would study the image, understanding its significance in the broader context of military training and development. But the photograph's greatest impact was on the soldiers who saw it, the recruits who wondered if they might be capable of similar achievement, the instructors who remembered the importance of patience and open-mindedness, the leaders who understood that potential could be found in the most unlikely places. The image had become a mirror, reflecting back the possibilities that existed within every person who was willing to work for them. Ghost's legend continued to grow in the classified world of special operations, though the details remained shrouded in secrecy. Mission reports spoke of impossible shots and perfect execution, of targets eliminated and objectives achieved with surgical precision. But the human being behind the legend remained invisible, known only to a select few who had earned the right to work with the Shadow Warrior. The years passed, and Ghost's missions took on increasing complexity and importance. World events shifted, threats evolved, and the demand for precision elimination grew ever more critical. Through it all, Ghost remained at the pinnacle of the profession, a standard against which other operators measured themselves, a reminder that excellence was possible for those willing to pursue it relentlessly. In quiet moments between missions, Ghost would sometimes think about the journey that had led to this point. The path from rejected pilot to elite sniper had been neither straight nor easy, marked by setbacks and challenges that had tested resolve and determination. But each obstacle had been overcome, each challenge had been met, each test had been passed through the application of skill, courage, and unwavering commitment to excellence. The rifle that had become Ghost's signature tool was itself a work of art, customized and refined through years of use and modification. Every component had been selected for maximum performance, every surface had been tuned for optimal accuracy. The weapon was an extension of Ghost's will, capable of delivering lethal precision at distances that defied comprehension. But the rifle was only a tool, no more capable than the person who wielded it. The real weapon was the mind behind the scope, the intellect that calculated wind and distance and timing with mathematical precision. This was the lesson that Rodriguez had tried to teach years earlier, that shooting was not about the gun but about the person who held it, that accuracy was a function of mental discipline as much as physical skill. The radio crackled with news of another mission, another target, another opportunity to serve in the shadows. Ghost acknowledged the transmission and began the familiar process of preparation, the mental and physical routines that had been refined through years of practice. The mission would be dangerous, the conditions challenging, but the outcome was as certain as human skill could make it. As Ghost prepared for deployment, the thoughts turned to legacy, not the legend that others might remember, but the real impact of a career spent in service to others. The missions completed, the lives saved, the threats eliminated. These were the true measures of success, the only recognition that mattered in the end. The aircraft engines spun up outside, their sound cutting through the night air like a blade. Ghost gathered the equipment with practiced efficiency, each piece of gear positioned for optimal access and use. The mission briefing had been thorough, But the real preparation had begun years earlier with an instructor who had learned to see past surface appearances to the warrior within. As the aircraft lifted off into the darkness, Ghost settled into the familiar rhythm of operational deployment. The cabin was filled with other operators, each one a specialist in their own field, each one carrying the weight of critical responsibility. But Ghost's path to this moment had been unique, marked by transformation and redemption, by the journey from doubt to respect. The mission unfolded with clockwork precision, each element falling into place according to the carefully rehearsed plan. Ghost's contribution was critical but brief. A single shot at impossible range, taken under conditions that would challenge the most sophisticated equipment. The target was eliminated with surgical precision, the mission completed without detection, the team extracted safely under cover of darkness. In the classified after-action report, Ghost's performance was noted with professional brevity, long-range elimination achieved, target neutralized, mission successful. The bureaucratic language failed to capture the skill required, the pressure endured, or the perfect execution that had made success possible. But in the world of special operations, such understatement was the highest form of recognition. Back at Fort Bragg, the eternal cycle of training continued. New recruits arrived, faced their challenges, and either rose to meet them or fell by the wayside. The rifle range echoed with the sound of gunfire, the sharp crack of bullets seeking their targets, the metallic clang of steel meeting steel. Each shot was a test, each target a challenge, each moment an opportunity to discover hidden potential. The photograph in the museum continued to fade with time, its edges becoming worn and its image growing dim. But its message remained as clear as ever, that warriors came in all forms, that respect was earned through actions, and that a single moment of perfect accuracy could change everything. The image had become more than just a memento. It was a symbol of the transformation that was possible when someone was given the chance to prove their worth. Master Sergeant Walsh stood at the observation post, watching the latest group of recruits attempt their qualification course. Among them was a young soldier whose exceptional performance reminded her of the stories she'd heard about Rodriguez's most famous student. The soldier's shooting was flawless, movements economical and precise, focus absolute and unwavering. Walsh made a decision that would echo through the years. She would recommend this soldier for advanced training, for the opportunity to follow in the footsteps of legends. The cycle was beginning again, the eternal process of discovering and developing the warriors who would serve in the shadows, protecting others through the application of skill and courage. The sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reflected off the targets on the distant range. The training company prepared for evening meal, the soldiers gathering in the mess hall to share stories and build the bonds that would sustain them through the challenges ahead. Among them were the future legends, the ones who would carry the lessons learned here into the wider world. In the gathering darkness, Ghost moved through the shadows of a distant land, rifle in hand, mission in progress. The scope's crosshairs centered on a target that would never see death coming, would never know the identity of the one who delivered final judgment. This was the reality of Ghost's world, invisible, lethal, and utterly professional. The shot rang out across the valley, its echo bouncing off distant hills before fading into silence. Another mission completed, another threat eliminated, another victory in the endless war between those who would harm innocents and those who stood ready to stop them. Ghost gathered the equipment and disappeared into the darkness, leaving behind no trace except the perfect accuracy of the work. Years later, when the classified files were finally declassified and the stories could be told, historians would marvel at the precision of Ghost's operations. They would study the ballistics reports, analyze the environmental conditions, and try to understand how such impossible shots had been made. But they would never fully comprehend the human element, the mind that had calculated each variable, the heart that had remained steady under pressure, the will that had never wavered in the face of overwhelming odds. The legend of Ghost would live on in the memories of those who had served alongside the Shadow Warrior, in the stories passed down from instructor to student, in the inspiration provided to others who faced their own moments of doubt and challenge. The name would become synonymous with excellence, a standard against which others measured themselves, a reminder that greatness was possible for those willing to pursue it relentlessly. But the person behind the legend remained invisible, known only to a select few who had earned the right to work with the Shadow Warrior. Ghost had become what warriors throughout history had always been: a guardian in the darkness, a protector of the innocent, a reminder that some things were worth fighting for and some prices were worth paying. The rifle range at Fort Bragg fell silent as the last shots of the day echoed across the valley. The targets stood like sentinels in the gathering dusk, witnesses to another day of training, another step in the endless process of forging warriors from raw recruits. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to discover the potential that existed within every person who was willing to work for it. The photograph in the museum continued to serve its purpose, reminding visitors of the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. The image had become a touchstone, a connection to the lessons learned from one exceptional soldier who had proven that warriors came in all forms. The story would live on, passed down through generations of soldiers who understood that respect was earned one shot at a time, one mission at a time, one life saved at a time. In the shadows of the world, Ghost continued to serve, invisible and indispensable, a reminder that some stories were too important to be told, too sacred to be shared, too critical to be compromised by public recognition. The legend would endure, but the person behind it would remain forever in the shadows, serving with quiet pride and unwavering dedication to the mission that had chosen them as much as they had chosen it. The sun set over Fort Bragg for the final time in this story, painting the sky in shades that would fade with the coming darkness. But the lessons learned here would endure, carried forward by those who had been touched by the example of one exceptional soldier who had proven that determination, skill, and courage could overcome any obstacle, that respect could be earned through actions, and that sometimes the most unlikely warriors became the greatest legends of all.